I'm going to read from my new novel, which is out in May. It's called The Burgess Boys, and I'm going to read just a couple of pages from the prologue, from the end of the prologue, and then I'll read just a couple of pages from the beginning of the book itself. At the end of the prologue, the part that you've missed, there's a first-person narrator, writer, who is talking with her mother. The narrator writer lives in New York, her mother lives in Maine, and they're reminiscing about the town of Shirley Falls that the writer came from, particularly a widow named Mrs. Burgess. The Burgess house had been about a mile from the center of town, a small house, but most of the houses in that part of Shirley Falls were small, or not big. The house was yellow and it sat on a hill with a field on one side. In the summer, Mrs. Burgess was sometimes in the front yard dragging a hose around a bush, but since the house was on a hill, she always seemed remote and small and didn't answer my father's wave whenever we drove by, I assume because she didn't see it. People think of towns as bubbling with gossip, but when I was a child, I seldom heard grown-ups talking about other families, and the Burgess situation was absorbed the way other tragedies were, like poor Bunny Fogg, who fell down her cellar stairs and didn't get discovered for 3 days, or crazy Annie Day, who pulled her dress up in front of boys even though she was almost 20 and still in high school. It was the children, we younger ones especially, who were gossips and unkind. The grown-ups were strict in setting us straight, so if a child on the playground whispered that Bobby Burgess was the one who killed his father, or had to see a doctor for mentals, the offender was sent to the principal's office, the parents were called, and snacks withheld at snack time. This didn't happen often. Jim Burgess was 10 years older than I, which made him seem as far away as someone famous, and he kind of was, even back then. He was a football player and president of his class and really nice looking with his dark hair. Bobby and Susan were younger, and at times babysat for my sisters and me. A few times when Bobby babysat, he would take turns carrying us on his back. You could tell you were clinging to someone kind and good the way he kept saying, turning his head part way, "You okay? You all right?" Once, when one of my sisters was running in the driveway and skinned her knee, we could see Bobby felt terrible. His big hand washed it off. "Ah, you're a brave girl. You'll be all right." Grown, my sisters moved to Massachusetts, but I went to New York and my parents were not happy. It was a betrayal to a New England lineage that stretched back to the 1600s. My ancestors had been scrappy and survived a great deal, my father said, but they had never stepped into the cesspool of New York. I married a New Yorker, a gregarious, wealthy Jewish man, and this exacerbated things. My parents did not visit often. I think the city frightened them. I think my husband seemed a foreigner, and that frightened them, and I think my children frightened them. Bold and spoiled they must have appeared, with their messy rooms and plastic toys, and later their pierced noses and blue and purple hair. So there were years of bad feeling between us. But when my husband died the same year my last child left for college, my mother, widowed herself the year before, came down to New York and stroked my forehead as she had done when I was little and sick with a bug, and said she was sorry I had lost both father and husband within such a short time. "What can I do for you?" she asked. I was lying on my couch. "Tell me a story," I said. She moved to the chair near the window. "Well, let's see. Susan Burgess's husband left her and moved to Sweden. I guess he had ancestors there calling to him, who knows. Susan still lives in Shirley Falls with that nutty one son." "Is she still pretty?" I asked. "Not a bit." And so it began, like a cat's cradle connecting my mother to me and me to Shirley Falls. Bits of gossip and news and memories about the lives of the Burgess kids supported us. We recorded and repeated. I told my mother again about the time I had come across Helen Burgess, Jim's wife, when they lived as I once did in the neighborhood of Park Slope in Brooklyn. My husband and I one night found ourselves dining near Helen and a friend, and we stopped near Helen's table as we were leaving. I'd had some wine, I suppose that's why I stopped, and I said to her that I had come from the same town Jim had grown up in. Something happened to Helen's face that stayed with me. A look of quick fear seemed to sit down on it. She asked my name and I told her, and she said Jim had never mentioned me. "No, I was younger," I said. And then she arranged her cloth napkin and with a little shake said, "I haven't been up there in years. Nice to meet you both. Bye-bye." My mother thought Helen could have been friendlier that night. She came from money, remember. She'd think she was better than someone from Maine. This sort of remark was one I had learned to let go. I no longer bothered myself with the defensiveness of my mother and her Maine. But after Susan Burgess's son did what he did, after the story about him had been in the newspapers, even in the New York Times and on television too, I said on the phone to my mother, "I think I'm going to write the story of the Burgess kids." "It's a good one," she agreed. "People will say it's not nice to write about people I know." My mother was tired that night. She yawned. "Well, you don't know them," she said. "Nobody ever knows anyone." Chapter 1, just a page and a half. On a breezy October afternoon in the Park Slope neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, Helen Farber Burgess was packing for vacation. A big blue suitcase lay open on the bed, and clothes her husband had chosen the night before were folded and stacked on the lounge chair nearby. Sunlight kept springing into the room from the shifting clouds outside, making the brass knobs on the bed shine brightly and the suitcase become very blue. Helen was walking back and forth between the dressing room with its enormous mirrors and white horsehair wallpaper, the dark woodwork around the long window, walking between that and the bedroom, which had French doors that were closed right now, but in warmer weather opened onto a deck that looked out over the garden. Helen was experiencing a kind of mental paralysis that occurred when she packed for a trip, so the abrupt ringing of the telephone brought relief. When she saw the word "private," she knew it was either one of the wives of her husband's law firm partners, they were a prestigious firm of famous lawyers, or else her brother-in-law Bob, who'd had an unlisted number for years but was not and never would be famous at all. "I'm glad it's you," she said, pulling a colorful scarf from the bureau drawer. "You are?" Bob's voice sounded surprised. "I was afraid it would be Dorothy." Walking to the window, Helen peered out at the plum tree, which was bending in the wind. "Why didn't you want it to be Dorothy?" he asked. "She tires me right now," said Helen. "You're about to go away with them for a week." 10 days, she said, "I know." A short pause, and then Bob said, "Yeah." His voice dropping into an understanding so quick and entire. It was his strong point, Helen thought, his odd ability to fall feet first into that little pocket of someone else's word for those few seconds. It should have made him a good husband, but apparently it hadn't. Bob's wife had left him years ago. "We've gone away with them before," Helen reminded him. "It'll be fine. Alan's awfully nice fellow, dull." "And managing partner of the firm," Bob said. "That too," Helen sang the words playfully. "A little difficult to say, 'Oh, we'd rather go alone on this trip.'" She added, "Jim says their older girl is really messing up right now. She's in high school, and the family therapist suggested Dorothy and Alan get away. I don't know why you get away if your kid's messing up. But there we are." "I don't know either," Bob said sincerely. Then, "Helen, this thing just happened." She listened, folding a pair of linen slacks. "Come on over," she interrupted. "We'll go across the street for dinner when Jim gets home."
In 1951, a man named Samuel Baldwin, who is the special assistant to President Harry Truman, is discovered in a bathroom of the YMCA in the act of sexual intercourse with a man. And he resigns his job and kills himself. In the house that he and his wife own as an investment property. His little girl, who's then 12, who's the protagonist of this book, is the one who finds him. And the mother is so humiliated by the situation and his killing himself that she invents a new life for both of them, a new name for both of them, and they move to Santa Fe. And so her life has become one of invention, including the fact that she has 2 children by a married man. That is the sort of prologue to the book, her finding her father. The book begins as she is about to move back to the house that she's never seen since that afternoon in Washington, D.C., where her father died. The afternoon in February, when Lucy Painter was moving from New York City to the house in Washington where her father had died, threatened violent storms. Lucy stood on the sidewalk outside the apartment on Sullivan Street, looking between the buildings at a slate gray, agitated sky. Snow, she said to no one in particular. Snowman, Felix said. He was standing on the sidewalk next to his mother, holding the large yellow chicken Reuben had given him as a going-away present. If it's snowing in Washington, we'll make a snowman when we get there, Lucy said, lifting him into the truck she had leased for the journey. Reuben was sitting on the back of the U-Haul eating a turkey sandwich while Mickey, the boy he had hired to help with the move, carried the small items down the steps of the 4-story walk-up. Bite? Reuben asked, patting a seat beside him on the back of the truck. Lucy pulled the orange wool cap he had given her for Christmas low on her brow. I'm not hungry, she said. But he pinched off an edge of the sandwich anyway, careful to get plenty of turkey in the bite, and popped it in her mouth. I'll call as soon as I get to the office in the morning, he said, and every night before I leave from work. Not Reuben's first promise, nor the only mention of his plan for keeping in touch after 13 years of living within blocks of each other, together several times a week whenever he could make it work. And that's that, Lucy asked. Of course that's not that, Lucy, he said. We have a permanent arrangement. She climbed up on the back of the truck beside him. Somehow the permanent part always slips my mind, she said. He dropped his hand on top of hers, pressing his body closer, and she knew that what he wanted from her now was silence, and her company sitting next to him, the heat of their breaths warming the winter air. Can we talk before I leave, Lucy asked. We always talk, Lucy, he said, his eyes half closed. We've said everything we have to say to each other. What Lucy wanted was an argument, a chance to fling collected grievances at one another, to set them at serious odds, whatever conflagration that might erupt to alter the sensible plan she had chosen, which was to leave New York. But Reuben Frank wasn't going to budge. He would be even-tempered and sweet, quietly determined to avoid a scene until the moment she hopped in the driver's seat and with the children headed south towards Washington, D.C. Your choice to move, remember? Reuben said. It wasn't exactly a choice, she said. She watched as the boy Mickey brought the work table she'd had since college down the steps, concentrating on the details of what she needed to do in the hours ahead. The boxes and suitcases and odds and ends she was tossing in the trash. Toys for Felix in the car, books for Maggie, her list of things to do so she wouldn't be moved to weep every time she caught a glimpse of Reuben's shock of red hair falling across his forehead. Here comes Maggie, Reuben was saying as Maggie rounded the corner, her arm around Rebecca Malone, a tendency he had under pressure to register the obvious. Rebecca wants to know why we have to move to Washington, Maggie said, coming up to the truck. Because of money, Lucy said, as she had said to Maggie many times. In Washington, I own the house, and it's less expensive to live there than in New York. She reached over, brushing her mittened hand across the girl's cheeks. Easy with children. Half a child herself, as Reuben would say. That's not exactly true about why you're moving, Reuben said, the words falling into his scarf so the girls wouldn't hear him. What would you have me say, Lucy asked. The truth? I'm just a little surprised that you're so upset. Angry, he said. Maggie was leaning over the large bin of refuse in front of the apartment. I suppose you threw out my whole childhood. She pulled a Raggedy Ann from the trash, shook her, picked dust motes out of the red yarn hair. You told me Raggedy Ann could be tossed because she's covered in cat throw-up, Lucy said. I said she was covered in cat throw-up, not that she could be tossed. Maggie dropped the soil doll back in the bin and leaned against Reuben's legs. So you'll come see us? You know I will, Reuben said. A lot? We'll see, he said. I'll come as often as I possibly can. And maybe we can go to the beach this summer. Maybe we can go to the beach, Reuben replied, which Lucy noted was a lie. How could he possibly get away from his real life for long enough to take Maggie to the beach? And what would he plan to tell Elaine? "What does a lot mean?" Lucy asked after the girls had headed down the street. "I don't know what it means," Reuben said, agitated the way he got when pressures bore down on him, as they had when he first met Lucy and again in the years they've been together, more or less together, depending on the point of view. "This is a trial, Lucy, and of course I want to see you as much as possible. Just don't say, 'we'll see.'" She could feel his furtive glance, sense the familiar fear mounting in him as he scouted an escape route the way he always seemed to do when she wanted more than he was capable of giving. That was the nature of their lives together, his terms. Lucy pulled her cap down lower on her eyes so the wool brushed her lashes. "I won't say, 'we'll see,'" Reuben said, "and I won't lie to you." "Oh, Reuben," Lucy said, "you have only lied to me." Lucy met Reuben Frank when she was 19. She had gone to New York City at her art professor's recommendation to show her portfolio of strange supernatural animals, painted in the brilliant colors of the desert, to publishers of children's books. She was sitting on a bench in the lobby of 555 Fifth Avenue, where George Barnes Books, Inc. was located, gathering the courage to take the elevator to the 7th floor, when Reuben, carrying a bag with his lunch, the New York Times under his arm, rushed through the revolving doors into the lobby and saw her. Her shoes were what struck him first. Her feet curled under a short orange flowered skirt. Her shoes, red ballet slippers with satin ribbons, resting toe to toe under the bench. "Hello," he said, "can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Reuben Frank of George Barnes' book," she said. "I have an appointment with him." "You do?" Reuben asked. "More or less," she said. She had found the name Reuben Frank in a book listing New York editors and publishers, but had not called in advance to arrange an appointment, had not even thought to call. She simply expected that Mr. Frank would be happy to look at her work, because her professor at RISD had told her she was an artist of unusual talent. "At least I hope I'll be able to meet with him when I get upstairs," she said. "I brought my pictures." "Luckily, you've run into the right person," he said, watching as she wriggled her feet into the ballet slippers. "I can arrange that meeting instantly." In the elevator, Lucy leaned down to tie the satin ribbons around her ankles, her hair parting to expose a curve in the shape of a half moon at the nape of her neck. "That did it," he told her later. On the 7th floor, the elevators opened and he led the way down the corridor, past the cubicles of editors, past the design room, the front desk with a young girl on the telephone, and into his office with its large window overlooking Fifth Avenue. "So," he said, clearing off his desk, "I'm ready to see your work." There were 6 paintings, only 6, she realized when she saw that they all fit on the top of the desk, looking more strange than she remembered. The color may be too bright, the animals unnaturally thin and pointy. "So what do you think?" she asked quickly. "I don't think about illustrations," he replied, raising the Venetian blinds behind his desk, picking up one of Lucy's drawings. He held it at an angle in light that spread across the room from the south-facing window. "You don't think they're too queer to put in a book for children, do you?" she asked, sensing Reuben's hesitation. He was leaning over his desk, examining a hedgehog-like creature with brilliant yellow eyes. "I think I love them," Reuben said, reassembling the portfolio, setting it on the edge of his desk. "I can't tell you why exactly. I simply know what I love and what I don't." Lucy put her feet up flat against the side of his desk, flushed, her heart pounding. "So now what will happen?" she asked. "Now I'm going to be your editor." "You are? And that's that?" "More or less. You'll go back to school and imagine a story for these creatures, and then we'll do a book together." "Not together," she said quickly. "I do everything alone." "We'll try it," Reuben said. "If it doesn't work between us, it doesn't work." He was falling in love with Lucy, with the wild imaginative figures she had brought to him, with the possibility of flight. He was 35 and married and childless. "This is very lucky, isn't it?" Lucy said as they walked back down the corridor to the elevator. "Certainly lucky for me," he said, "these wonderful original illustrations." He reached over, running his finger lightly down the bridge of her nose. "Goodbye, my new surprise," he said as the elevator doors opened. "Hello, my new editor," Lucy said, stepping through the doors, her head down, looking at her red ballet slippers as the doors closed. For hours in the next month, she would lie on her back in the tiny single room of her boot house at Risky, imagining Reuben, his hand on her belly, his breath in her hair. There was no stopping the rush of feeling, no instinctive fear or hesitation in loving Reuben. He would leave his wife. They would marry, as he had said would happen in their long conversations from his office, as he hoped would happen. Not a good fit with Elaine, he told her. It was as if the whole of her life since her father's death had led to this particular man, gentle like her father had been, and certain of himself, her editor, who could be counted on for everything. Thank you.